Coming up, this week marks a grim 2-year anniversary of COVID-19, and Interior Secretary Deb Haaland looks back on her first year. Plus, we look beyond the 50th anniversary of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, and more on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. Working with award-winning professors, Cronkite students learn news reporting, social media, shooting and editing videos, and producing content for communications industries. Cronkite's 15 professional programs give students the opportunity to cover critical issues throughout the U.S. and beyond. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Amarawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. President Joe Biden is fresh off of signing a massive spending package, and in it are important funding and provisions for Native communities. The president signed a $1.5 trillion omnibus spending bill while surrounded by federal lawmakers on Tuesday. The bill appropriates funds for the federal government until September 30th, and it also includes major funding for Indian country. More than $6.7 billion will go towards Native health programs within the Department of Health and Human Services. $3.65 billion will go to the Bureaus of Indian Affairs and Education and the Department of the Interior. $7 million of that allocation will pay for the Interior's federal boarding school investigation. The other funding allocations will go towards housing, supporting Native languages, addressing the missing and murdered Indigenous persons crisis, and tackling climate change. In addition, the spending package sends $13.6 billion in aid to Ukraine. Other financial help is coming to the people of Ukraine from a tribal nation in Oregon. The Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation is sending $5,000 to the group Doctors Without Borders to help with the medical needs of refugees. The tribe's Board of Trustees formally condemned Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation for invading Ukraine, saying the attack was vicious and unprovoked. And Catherine Brigham, the board chair, issued this statement saying, "The Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation stands with Ukraine and their freedom as a democratic nation." Tribal leaders say they support the sovereignty of Ukraine and compared this invasion to when their homelands were also invaded in the 1850s. The first Native nation to legalize marijuana continues to break new ground in the evolving and expanding cannabis industry. Stuart Huntington has more on the Flandreau Santee Sioux tribe's growing marijuana operations.
The small South Dakota tribe made history in 2015 by legalizing pot, but federal authorities threatened to shut them down, so tribal leaders opted for a tactical retreat.
We decided to burn the crop, so we called our law enforcement in, had them do an inventory and witness everything and destroyed the crop so we could live to get started another day. And here we are 5-6 years later, and we're able to fire the grow back up as the state was moving to legalize.
Quickly producing high-quality product.
This is your flour. This would be your top shelf flour, really. This would be what gets grammed up and goes into our ace on the shelf, and then anything that we trim off from around that will be made into oil.
Last summer, after state voters legalized medical marijuana, the tribe launched Native Nations Cannabis on its reservation and opened South Dakota's first and still only medical marijuana dispensary, more than a year before the state finalized its regulatory procedures. There's been a little pushback from some in state law enforcement who thought the tribe was jumping the gun.
The tribe has taken the position that for individuals who are arrested with having products from our facility, that will pay for their criminal defense.
But business is booming.
We've grown to approximately 50 employees right now, almost overnight. We can't pump products out fast enough. We don't have the correct grow capacity, which is why we're adding more grow capacity.
The tribe has 2 new growing facilities under construction to provide the raw material for its state-of-the-art processing lab, but the tribe has even greater ambitions. Soon, state-licensed dispensaries will open, and Flandreau eyes serving that market.
We're looking to expand and get on the state side in South Dakota, as well as other jurisdictions, but we purchased a building out in Mitchell, South Dakota, former Shopco building that's a decent setup to get started.
Really, there's no other legal product in the state right now except for what we're doing. So everybody's going after dispensaries, but there's no marijuana.
The small tribal nation is taking a big lead in this nascent industry.
In the Midwest, we're the only operation that's growing, processing, and selling from Denver to Illinois.
And the tribe stands ready to lend a hand to other native nations.
If anybody's interested in talking, we're very open, we're easy to get a hold of, and we're open to site visits for people to come here, and we're willing to help any way we can.
In Flandreau, South Dakota, this is Stuart Huntington for ICT.
And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act changed the landscape for the economy and Indigenous communities. A look back and to the future. But first, a Washington update with Holly Cook-Macaro. This week marks a grim 2-year anniversary that changed the world. Back then, it looked like COVID-19 would be a minor disruption. Instead, it has turned into a looming presence in many of our lives 2 years later. Joining us to talk about its impact on federal and tribal policy is Holly Cook-Macaro. She's a partner at Spirit Rock Consulting and an ICT regular contributor. Hi, Holly. Nice to see you.
Hi, Elia. It's good to see you.
So we're 2 years into the pandemic. How are tribes handling COVID-19?
Well, I think like most of America and the world, that Indian country is in recovery mode. As a community, we experienced so much loss, from grandmas and grandpas to parents to young children. Our losses, through every reservation community were tremendous. And as we've discussed several times over the last couple of years, which seems even odd to say that it's been 2 years. Those losses not only represented, pain for the families, but critical losses of cultural knowledge, from ceremony to language, that those losses we may never know the impacts of. Also, at this point 2 years ago, and even, thinking about where we were in terms of the most successful economic enterprises in Indian country, our gaming operations, associated entertainment and resort operations, they were shut down across America. And for so many tribal leaders who have spent so many years, building those up in order to support their communities. And, gaming revenues, they run the gamut from, small tribes and to gaming revenues on large land-based reservations with large communities, and those revenues keep tribal government general funds in the black. So it was an extremely, I think, terrifying time for tribal leadership for Indian country, not knowing when it would open, what that might look like. And so as we come out of this, I would say that we are in cautious recovery mode. How we've recovered otherwise, we continue to see so many ceremonies, even funerals, were put off as Indian country continues to bury those that we lost in the pandemic. We also have the joy of now starting to gather again for ceremonies and other things. So there are silver linings to coming out of this, and again, but cautious. Do we know what will happen next?
One of the ways that the federal government actually tried to help with COVID-19 recovery is by giving historic investments to Indian country. I'm curious, Holly, do you think that we'll see long-term impacts of those investments?
I really do. So 2 years ago, coupled with the closure of the gaming operations and largely all economic enterprises as America shut down, we were just on the front end. The CARES Act was put together very quickly. And so that $8 billion infusion that came in, it was necessary, it was needed. For tribes, though, it was somewhat delayed due to the litigation and the eligibility of the Alaska Native corporations. So we had the immediate CARES Act. Then later in the summer, we had the American Recovery Plan. Those were critical investments. We continue to rely on annual appropriations to support to meet the federal government's treaty and trust responsibilities. But we have to work for those appropriations every year. So that 30-40 billion plus that went into Indian country, those filled some gaps that annual appropriations may never have gotten to. And really, I think to the surprise of many, the gaming industry has recovered rather quickly, thanks in part to those recovery funds and the flexibility in use that tribes worked really hard to ensure from the Department of Treasury. Have all of our needs been met? Did that large infusion to Indian country meet all of our needs? No, absolutely not. We will continue to rely on annual appropriations, but again, those filled some coffers that we may never have gotten to through the annual funding process. So overall, from community recovery to the economic side, we really are, I think, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, but cautious recovery mode.
I want to switch gears and talk about the IHS director nominee. President Biden announced that Rosalind So is his nominee to be the director of the IHS. And of course, she needs to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Do you think that she'll face any challenges in her nomination process?
I don't think she will face many challenges. The importance to Indian country of having someone in that seat is absolutely critical. So the timing of this, even though we've been waiting, over a year to get this nomination, over to the Senate, we're at the front end. Just last Friday, the Congress and then the President signed the FY22 funding bill. So now the Congress is going to turn to the funding bill for FY23. We hope to get Rosalind So on the calendar for a Senate confirmation hearing and have that completed. So we need that Senate confirmed political appointee voice from the Biden administration at the table, with the gravitas that a Senate confirmation brings with it, negotiating and advocating for the tribal resources that IHS needs.
And do we have any indication yet of when her confirmation could be heard in any committees or when the process will sort of speed along?
I don't believe it's been calendared yet. There certainly is, I know, a high priority request from the administration side and from Indian country to get that calendared. So she will be confirmed, in the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, chaired by Senator Schatz and vice chaired by Senator Murkowski. So if as soon as they can find some time, and I know that's a priority for them as well, we will see that happen.
Holly, we only have a short time left, but as I mentioned in my opening, Secretary Deb Haaland is seeing her first year being confirmed into office. What do you think has been her biggest accomplishment so far in this first year?
There are so many accomplishments, right? I do think what we saw right out of the gate, and it carried on from her congressional work on missing and murdered Indigenous women, and the resources and the effort that came out of that. There are others, co-management, tribal lands protection, the restoration, tribal justice. But the loss of our women and associated sometimes lack of follow-up from federal law enforcement, that hits at the heart of Indian country, and that is where Secretary Haaland started. So this has been a tremendous year for her. It doesn't quite seem like a year. And so much has been accomplished that her voice has been heard throughout the administration. I look forward to seeing what else she has in store for us in the remainder of this term.
Well, Holly, thank you as always.
Thank you, Aaliyah.
The Russian war in Ukraine has been escalating over the past couple of weeks, leaving some Arctic and Alaska Native communities wondering what the growing international tension will mean for their home region. ICT special correspondent Megan Sullivan has been exploring these topics, and she joins us now for more. Hi, Megan. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
So I understand that you filed a story recently about this very topic. Tell us at a high level what the Russian invasion of Ukraine means for Alaska Native communities.
Yeah, so it's actually more so connected to kind of this geopolitical consequence of a warming climate. So in the Arctic, you have over the past few years and decades, melting sea ice. And with that comes new navigation routes and just basically a more accessible Arctic. So the countries in that region, such as Russia and the US by way of Alaska, have kind of been exploring new opportunities in the region. And Russia has been particularly aggressive in their new kind of Arctic strategy. They're very interested in the possibility of a Northern Sea Route, which is this new shipping route opening up in the Arctic that basically shortens the length of travel time for people going from Asia to Europe, specifically kind of shippers or even kind of more larger naval ships. And they're also interested in the increased opportunities for natural resource extraction. So they've really, really amped up their presence in the Arctic. And on the American side of this, you have Alaska Native communities, predominantly Alaska Native communities in the region, who live upon the coast, who have like kind of noticed these increased elements of Russian presence over the years. So of course, with this in the backdrop already, some of these communities were wondering, what does this mean for us now that these kind of international tensions are increasing in a very real way? So that's the background for the situation in the Arctic.
I actually want to take a step back before we go any further. We've reported about this a little bit already, but actually tell us how close Russia and Alaska are to each other. I mean, there's this famous phrase, right, by the former Senator Sarah Palin, who says, "I can see Russia from my house." Tell us, though, in reality, what does that actually look like in terms of how close they are?
Yeah, so, in the parts of Alaska that like most people live in, I feel like Russia and Alaska are very far apart. But when you get to the Arctic, they're actually only around 50 miles apart. If you look at the there's two islands they're basically split by like this international border. They're 50 miles apart. They have indigenous relatives on both sides. It's this really interesting dynamic. And for people who live in that region, people who live in some of the Arctic places, or the Arctic North Slope coastal regions, Russia is very close. It is a matter of you can see it from their doorstep. So there definitely is some truth to that statement, especially the more north you get. And definitely if you live on that island that's right next to the other Russian island.
So you've talked already about this growing presence of Russia in things like natural resource extraction, but let's talk about the military. Has there been a growing presence of the Russian military that Alaska Natives have sort of witnessed?
Yeah, so they have really built up their military in the Arctic. I'm forgetting the specific statistics. It's in the article, but it's a very noticeable, measurable growth of, bases, of icebreakers, of ships. And with that being said, people who are living in the more northern Arctic regions of Alaska have noticed their kind of aircrafts flying in. And fishers in the Bering Sea region have also encountered Russian kind of military ships practicing for military operations in the US side of the international water zone that we are in. And so the presence is very noticeable, and it's definitely been increasing over the years, which has kind of caused a little bit of concern, understandably, for people who are encountering this.
In your reporting so far, have you come across any sources who have said they're worried about, what's happening in Ukraine? I mean, specifically because so many experts are saying that if Putin wants to take over Ukraine, what's to say that he won't stop there? Are you seeing any of that in your reporting of people being worried?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of questions just about what this means for the world in general. And because certain communities in Alaska have noticed this Russian kind of military expansion firsthand, it's obviously something people are wondering about. But our national security sources have reassured the communities that in the time being, the Ukraine invasion isn't directly linked to any of their kind of more strategic goals in the Arctic. With that being said, though, it does show that they are kind of willing to take real action to break international law, and kind of, take these, they're just saying, they should take whatever new kind of measures they're doing in the Arctic seriously, but they don't want to cause alarm bells. It's just something that should be continued to be watched.
Megan, what has been the response from the Arctic Council and from Alaska Native leaders?
On a broader scale, within the nation or within the Arctic, you have the Arctic Council, which consists of the 8 Arctic nations, and all of them have, which Russia and the US are a part of, all of them have condemned Russia's actions, have halted their participation in the council at the time. And it just so happens that this year, Russia has the chairmanship for the council. It's a rotating chairmanship. And so they are kind of the ones in charge of the council at the moment. And so they released a statement in response to the other nations' statement about how, they're going to continue with their goals in the Arctic, and due to the kind of halting of participation by the other nations, they're going to make it focus more on their domestic goals, which obviously kind of ties back into the original concern in the Arctic about their very clear domestic agenda to kind of utilize these new opportunities in the region. So that's kind of the updates for some of the leaders in the region, what they're thinking, given the recent news.
Well, Megan, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Last December marked the 50th anniversary of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, also known as ANCSA. This one act changed the structure of how Indigenous people in Alaska are organized. But what was life like before ANCSA? ICT's Patty Tholahongva shares some stories from Alaska Native elders and also showcases the stories we've produced in our special series.
I was born in Nome during territorial times, and I was delivered by an Eskimo midwife by the name of Fanny Wallach.
We did not have electricity. We did not have running water in our houses. We did not have, we used outdoor toilets. And I didn't know I was missing a thing.
From the age of 13 and 14 too, I didn't go to school. So in those 2 years, my father taught me how to fish, how to hunt, subsistence skills that I need to know in order to live in our area and survive. They tell us that we'll get married. We won't be single. If we're single beyond 20 or 21, 22, then we'll need help.
I'm Raven, a Duck Dane Ton from the Mount Fairweather house in Hoona. I was a World War II kid, and I would be fighting against the full-blooded Indians because they would call me a Nazi because my dad was German. I spent many, many hours on the blackboard writing, "I will not talk Indian." I understand Tlingit quite a bit, almost all of it, but I don't talk it. I emotionally cannot talk it, and that's the effect that these teachers had.
I first heard about the Settlement Act negotiations when I was in high school.
When the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act was signed, it changed the way of life for many. For the 50th anniversary, we partnered with Alaska Public Media, as well as the Anchorage Daily News, to produce in-depth stories about the effects of ANCSA. Megan Sullivan was our lead reporter. ANCSA created 13 regional corporations and more than 150 village corporations to oversee 44 million acres of land. Megan also reported on the issue of identity and how ANCSA has split families.
I had the good fortune to be born by December 18th, 1971.
Those born after December 1971 were not eligible to get 100 shares in their regional corporations.
They will never be as equal as I, because they don't share in the development of the subsurface estate.
Megan's story, ANCSA at 50, looks ahead to the next generation of Alaska Native shareholders. You can read all of her stories on our website, IndianCountryToday.com.
When I look off into the future, I still see this great threat that these native corporations could cease to be native corporations. What's it going to be like 50 years from now?
In Phoenix, Patty Thoahungva, ICT News.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more news, visit IndianCountryToday.com. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives. I am Aaliyah Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.